Everyone, it's Brian Isaacs back with a brand new interview. Today we are talking with Roy Schwartz. He is a pop culture historian, journalist, writer, and currently curator of one of the exhibits over for the Jewish comic experience at the Center for Jewish History. Thanks for joining us, Roy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So the exhibition you have is entitled "Fighting Fascism." Could you get into a little bit more, about that?
Certainly. So the exhibit, which if you're watching this on video instead of reading or listening, you can see behind me in partial glory, is comprised of five micro exhibits, five vignettes, which sort of serve as chapters of a book. So each one focuses on one topic, one aspect of comics and Judaism, whether it's the Jewish history of comics, Jewish origins of comics, or fighting fascism, how superhero comics were used to fight fascism, which was my focus, or Jewish representation in comics, or non-European Jewish comics and that kind of stuff,
Right.
and all together from one narrative. And we are a team of nine curators that worked on this. So we all come from different disciplines and different backgrounds. So this is it's a large scale exhibit.
Right.
So my part, my micro exhibit is titled Fighting Fascism, which I co-curated with the Leo Beck Institute, focuses on German Jewish history, together with Dr. Magdalena Robel. And we really focused on four different characters that were used as essentially propaganda figures, these grassroots propaganda figures against Nazism, which are Superman, Captain America, Senorita Rio, which was huge back in the day, but has somehow fallen under the kind of dust of history, and we're trying
Right.
to take that dust off, as well as some expressions of anti-Jewish newspaper cartoons in New York Yiddish newspapers, as well as comics drawn in concentration camps by young survivors. And those comics made them out. So it's really a wide-spanning exhibit.
Now, I know a lot of people are familiar with definitely the Captain America being the first patriotic hero and punching first patriotic hero punching out Hitler. He's not the first. The Shield technically is the first patriotic hero.
So that's correct. Captain America is most famously on the cover of Captain America Comics #1, which is cover dated March 1941, but actually was already on shelves December 20th, 1940. We're talking about a whole year before Pearl Harbor. And just to give you guys some context, at that time, 93% of Americans were staunchly against any intervention. So that was sort of the public mood. And right there on the cover, Jack Kirby, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, born Jaime Simon and Jacob Kurtzberg, which is very important to this, had Hitler punched on the cover. And then in the next cover, in the story after story, and they got death threats and they got hate mail, and people picketed Marvel, then Timely's offices. And again, to give you historical context, we had the German-American Bund, which was the pro-Nazi organization. Just the year prior, they had a parade on Fifth Avenue in New York of 22,000 members, and they filled up Madison Square Garden. So these guys started calling Marvel, threatening we'll hang you from lampposts in Times Square and all this kind of stuff. And they ignored it, and they continued fighting the good fight until Bund members started waiting for them outside the lobby. And once it became real, they called the police. And the amazing part is they got a call back, not from the police, but the mayor of New York, Fiorello LaGuardia, who, unbeknownst to most people, even to this day, was actually Jewish. He was an Italian Jew. His sister actually died in the camps. And he said, I love what you guys are doing. Keep it up. I will make sure no harm comes to you. And he effectively turned the lobby of Marvel, Timely, back into a police precinct. And he had a police guard patrolling the offices thereafter,
Oh,
which
wow.
is an amazing story. I'll add quickly to that, though, that even though Cap is the most famous and my personal favorite,
Right.
Superman is actually the first superhero to take on Hitler, as well as Stalin. Way back in February 27th, 1940, this is a whole year before then, in the pages of the Look magazine. That was sort of like a competitive life magazine. He had Siegel and Schuster, Jerry Siegel and Joe Schuster, the creators of Superman, wrote a short 2-page story how Superman would win the war, in which Superman grabs Hitler and Stalin. They were still allies at the time following the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and brings them to stand trial for war crimes in front of the League of Nations. So that even predates that. So there's a really rich, fascinating, and they also got death threats, and there's like a whole thing about that. It's a really fascinating history, and we explored that at length in the exhibit.
It definitely seems like you know, after Cap. I don't know if my history is correct, but it seems like after Cap's cover seems like everybody was had a cover with punching the Nazi or the Japanese, and it's a lot of different things.
Oh yeah, that was the thing to do, right? Especially after Pearl Harbor. Up until Pearl Harbor, everybody was walking on eggshells.
Right.
And there was actually a lot of public and political pressure on the entertainment industry to not offend the Germans or their supporters. The pressure was mostly on the movies. Comic books sort of flew under the cultural radar, so they
Right.
got away with it. It was kiddie fair. It was 3 months from conception to shelf. It's sort of an unfettered funnel into the creator's sort of inner life and unconscious mind and that kind of stuff. So it was like semi-stat. It was like underground propaganda, right? But
Yes.
they knew what they were doing. And one of the things we point to in the exhibit is that Siegel and Schuster actually based early Superman covers on World War One propaganda posters and recruitment posters, which is something that's never been noted before. And of course, once Pearl Harbor happened and America joined the war, everybody was very jingoistic and gung ho and hoorah and all that kind of stuff. And then they all fought the Nazis and or the Japanese and or the fascists. Yeah.
It just, I mean, it seems like a lot of history is constantly repeating itself, especially with the fascism. It does seem they cover it up. At least a big, DC and Marvel seem to cover it up with their own types of characters. Every occasion they will have like neo Nazis, but for other than the with Superman battling the Klan, it's always been like at least in Marvel they have the Sons of Serpent, Hydra, all these stand-ins, and they're still doing it today. It's like they, I feel like they still feel like they're walking on eggshells a little.
That's very accurate and very astute, and it's truer than ever before. Superhero comics have always been political. In fact, that's what they were created. They were
You're right.
created to punch Nazis. That's what they were meant to do. You're talking about an industry that's almost entirely made up of very young, early 20s all the way down to teenage Jewish refugees or children of refugees from Europe who knew very well what was going on was happening to their family in Europe. The idea that they created all this and sent their avatars in fiction, their characters, in so many cases we know are based on themselves as sort of wish fulfillment characters. The idea that they sent them to fight Nazis without that being some sort of message, getting something off their, out of their gut, off their heart, is of course ridiculous. Obviously, this was, and when I say propaganda, I don't mean manipulative or
Right.
Machiavellian, grassroots. In Yiddish, to say kishka, their innards. It came out of their innards, right? But these characters over the years became corporate characters. They became IPs. They became too big for their own britches in this particular sense. And now everybody's very careful. And they really only go explicitly after things that are thought to be consensus, like homophobia. And even then, there's always stuff online. Ironically, I would say that anti-Semitism, which the world in the past half decade or so has experienced a tsunami unprecedented since actually
Right.
the Holocaust by
Yeah.
numbers, by factual numbers. There's never been this violent or this aggressive or mainstreamed. I would argue that's probably the thing that has been the most ignored in superhero comics by both Marvel and DC in this kind of bitter irony. But yeah, these characters can't be that political anymore, supposedly.
It's interesting you bring that point up because it's like the only time you really see any one character really battling against that is whenever Marvel uses the Israeli heroine Sabra. It's like she seems to be the only one, you know, who's when they bring her in, they always have her, tackle the anti-Semitism and anti-Israel stories, it seems like.
A little bit. I'm very much of two minds. So let's zoom in on Sabra for a second, right? And I feel that she's become a bit warped. And she was never created to be a particularly positive character. I've always had an issue
Right.
with her. And I really hope that Shira Haas, who plays her in the next Captain America movie, which I don't know what's the latest title to come up with, New World Order. I hope they portray her in a positive way. The idea is that the term Zionism has really been taken out of context and warped to the point where it sort of lost its original meaning. And its
Right.
original meaning is the Jewish people's self-determination in their ancestral homeland. That's it. It's the Jews' right to live in that area. It doesn't deprive anybody else of any rights. It doesn't specifically state this border here and not that border there. It just means the Jews also have a right to live in their ancestral homeland, in which they had continuous presence throughout history, no matter what else you may have heard. So Judaism, Zionism in of itself is just the settlement of Zion, which is another name for Israel. And for all intents and purposes, Zionism ended in 1948 when Israel got established.
Right.
That's it. There's no more. That was the movement. But over the years, it's really gotten from outside. It's really gotten a bad rep, a very kind of warped version. But it's never the intent, nor how Israelis, I was born and raised in Israel, define it at all, ever. So Sabra is sort of a problem with that. And one hand, oh, we have an Israeli superhero. And oh, she is a hero. She's a counterterrorism operative. She saves lives.
Right.
In a few stories, she's very angry, but in a few stories where she had the chance to take life, she didn't. However, she's very militant and she's
Yeah.
very aggressive.
Yeah.
And
I've noticed that.
right, there are a couple of comics where she said things that were borderline bigoted, like and that bothers me.
Yeah.
But believe it or not, most people in Israel don't walk around with a scowl and a gun on their shoulders.
Yeah.
It's just a normal country like any other country. It just asks to be judged as such, right? So zooming back out of that discussion for a little bit, anti-Semitism is not an Israeli problem, and vice versa. It's a much wider problem, and all kind of bigotry is everybody's problem.
Yeah.
The whole first they came for ...
Yeah.
You can't be Black Lives Matter, but screw the Jews. You can't be, I stand with Israel, but screw the LGBTQ. It doesn't work. We either all get along as a humanity or we don't, whether or not we disagree. But the fact is that, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's Me Too, or whether it's LGBTQ or I am whatever, those things have made their way into the comics, into superhero comics, explicitly to different degrees.
Yeah.
But when it comes to anti-Semitism, it's been tumbleweeds.
Yeah.
It's that me, as well as a bunch of other people who I've been talking to who are part of this kind of thinking, are just sitting there and waiting. The whole persecution of mutants and the X-Men is one big metaphor. How is this never connected, right?
Yeah. I fully agree with you.
Right. So that's that's all I have to say about that.
It's very interesting. I don't, like you said, I don't understand why they haven't tackled it. I don't know if they're afraid of something uh, or it could be, the power is seeing how they're both owned by major corporations now. Those corporations may just want to put the foot down on it and not deal with it whatsoever.
Right. And
It's not
I want to keep things in this conversation very positive. Superheroes are very
right.
positive. They're inspiring characters. They help us be better us. But I think when it comes to anti-Semitism, there's a lot of double standard. It's just held and judged on a whole different scale, and the sensitivity to it is much lower in the wider culture than to other forms of bigotry. And there's a lot of whataboutism. When
Yes.
Black Lives Matter is about the simple right of people to not be brutalized by police because of the color of their skin. What could be more just than that? But
Right.
nobody comes and says, okay, but what about Native Americans? But what about Hispanic people that are getting roughed up in the borders? They just allowed it to be its own thing. And anti-Semitism is never allowed to be its own thing. They always have to say, but what about, but as we said, superheroes, well, they've always meant to combat these attitudes. What is the origin story of Superman if not about taking in immigrants and treating them well because it's going to pay off, right? That's the baked in metaphor. It's a promise, right? So superheroes are positive characters, and we hope that this exhibit does that it helps inspire people to kind of keep their chin up, right? and find strength and inspiration in these characters, as well as to portray Jewish characters in the comics in a more accurate and positive and celebratory light. Whether those creators are Jewish or not is irrelevant.
Right. No, I fully agree with you. I did have a chance to see the exhibit this past weekend. It was amazing. I brought my 11-year-old son, who, comics is one of the many things he likes.
You're raising
Uh,
him right.
and, and the way I was able to give him the sense of pride was explaining to him, like, this character is Jewish, this character is Jewish, and show it was able to show him examples in some of the books. Like, he was blown away with the Thing being Jewish, and him, you know, doing the mourner's Kaddish, and then when he got married, stepping on the glass. And uh, there's a scene in Cross
Into
the Spider
into
Verse.
the Spider-Verse.
Uh, yeah, into this way. Yeah, where you see Peter Parker step on the glass, and my son, like, got really excited about that. And I really felt like, we are seeing Jewish heroes definitely more in a positive light than what we see too. A lot of them have been kind of retcons, but it's not being pushed down anybody's throat at the same time. It seems like a very natural progression.
Yeah, yeah, and as you said, your son was so excited to learn, to see the Thing as being Jewish, to see Peter Parker step on a glass, and representation matters. It's not
Yeah,
everything, it's not everything, and metaphor should never come in front of the story or in front of the character. It should always be the background, kind of the undergirding structure. But it does matter, and we are excited when we see ourselves reflected in these things. And of course, we make a distinction between Jewish as a metaphor. Is Clark Kent, is Superman really Jewish? No, but is the metaphor? Absolutely.
yeah,
Same thing for Steve Rogers as Captain America. But the Thing is Jewish, and of course, we can debate whether the retcon was actually revealing what was always there or not, or whether they should,
right.
you know. But it's fun, and one of the emphases of this exhibit is that Jewish doesn't necessarily mean European-derived, white passing, what's called Ashkenazi Jewish, but there's all
Right.
kinds of. The fact is that most Jews in the world, more than half, are not white passing Ashkenazi. In Israel, it's actually about 30%, about 70% are people of Arab country descent, of African descent, of East Asian descent, etc. They're not so much on the cultural radar here, and we try to emphasize that in
Right.
nobody knows that Zoe Kravitz, who plays Catwoman in the Batman, is Jewish on both her sides. Lenny Kravitz
Yeah.
and Lisa Bonet are both Jewish, but it's not on the cultural radar that that's what a Jew is, right? They think of somebody
Right. Yeah.
who looks white more or less, but it does matter, and it's fun. And I want to emphasize for the people who are watching or reading who are not Jewish, it's not about ownership, right? It's not about it's
Right.
mine, it's not yours. It's not about that. It's about recognizing contribution and just adding one more layer with which you can enjoy these characters and
Yeah.
stories. Just enriches the whole thing.
No, I fully agree with you. It really does. It's just, a little background to the character that makes them more human and more relatable to people. And, it's one of the great things. And, we've definitely seen a lot with, the Holocaust in comics, but I think what opened really my eyes about a different aspect of Jewish life was the works of Will Eisner, his tenement stories. It was just because my parents grew up in Newark when it was a all Jewish area, and I found that hard to believe. Then I read the tenement stories, and I'm like, oh my god, this is what life was like. And it's another aspect of my Judaism that I really never knew about. So I found that very fascinating too.
Oh, absolutely. And so Will Eisner's 1978 A Contract with God and Other Tenement Stories is widely recognized as the first graphic novel.
Right.
I feel like an evolutionary tree. There are things before that are worthy, but that's the one everybody agrees on is the first, right?
Yeah.
And we actually have the original art for the first page in the exhibit, which I
Yeah.
think is
Saw
amazing.
that.
It's a huge
Yeah.
historical artifact, right? And amazing we got it. And I believe we got it courtesy of Denny Fingeroth, who's he's the head of the Will Eisner Week and a noted historian in the field. And the it takes place in the South Bronx tenements, which in the 20s and 30s were mostly Jewish. That is mostly
Right.
for the 50s kind of fly to the suburbs. And it goes to show the Jewish culture, including Jewish American culture, doesn't begin and end with the Holocaust, right?
Right.
Judaism is 4,000 years old. When Jesus Christ was born, Judaism was already as old as Christianity is today. That's how old it is.
Yeah.
So to say all that can be summed up with Holocaust remembrance, eating bagels, and using some Yiddish, there's a lot more to it. So we really try in this exhibit to shed a light on that. And we have Jewish folklore in comics and Jewish philosophy in comics. And Neil Gaiman, it's all about the Talmud, right? The Jewish extra biblical writings. And he uses a lot of them in The Sandman. And you don't need to know any of that to enjoy The Sandman. It's wonderful. But if you do know some of that, you enjoy The Sandman that much more.
Right. Yeah, I fully agree with you. And one of the things I really loved about the exhibit, it just wasn't. Unfortunately, comics still has the stigma of people in spandex. So it is always so nice to see, it as a visual reading art, just in other ways. The Rabbi's Cat, like I said, with some of Will Eisner's work, Mouse. It's just these are important things, and each one of them showed Judaism in a different light. And it's very refreshing. Then, like I said, it's just I don't know why the stigma's still there after all of this, but we still have that stigma of comic books are a kids thing of people in spandex, and that's far from the truth these days. It's You can find a comic book on just about anything.
Yeah, it's a medium,
It,
exactly.
yeah,
I'm still amazed when I come across somebody and they have that kind of Wortham style, like comic books corrupts the youth. It's
yeah,
stupid. It's very illiterate. And you're like, really? The 1950s called. They want you back. It's
yeah,
so. And, but yeah, it's a medium, just like cinema or just like television or just like theater. And to judge a whole medium, regardless of the content, is of course insane.
yeah,
Now, personally, I don't have anything about against tights. I love superheroes.
yeah. So do I.
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't even have to be good to be fun, right? Not every movie you go has to be some cinema art kind of whatever.
Right.
I like guys in capes punching each other and speaking slogans about right and wrong. It's fun, and I also think that when art becomes a little bit too self-aware of being art, it sort of stops being interesting. I like that it's a little bit subversive still. There's not a coolness to it.
Right.
Um, but we really try to, so we obviously focus on that and celebrate that in the exhibit, where we try to not focus just on that. So if you're into comics, you don't need to care about the Jewish angle. You will come and see these things, and they're amazing. There's
Right.
like an original painting by Joe Simon of Captain America that's never been seen. That's an amazing thing to see.
Yeah.
And then we also have the laboratory section, which is where kids and families are invited to come and create comics and draw on
Yeah.
walls and dress up and take pictures. You don't have to care about the exhibit at all to just come and enjoy that. So
It,
we
it's there was nothing about it, the dress up and how comics are made, but panel by panel. It's nothing to do with Judaism. It's just the process, and it's just dressing up is just a fun thing to do.
right, right.
But like I said, the other part with the panels and stuff, you just learn how to put together a story. It's
It's
just
just like jazz, right? Jazz is a very specific Black American invention. Came from the Harlem Renaissance, early 20th century New Orleans. You don't need to care about any of that to enjoy jazz. So this is the same thing. It's a jazz exhibit, right? It's a comics exhibit. If you want to know the history, it will teach you everything you want to know, but you don't need to care about that to enjoy it. And then we have the event day coming up. The preview night is November 11th, and the event day is November 12th. We have panels and workshops, and I believe a screening. And we have some industry giants: Brian Michael Bendis, Frank Miller, Elisa
Mhm.
Quigley, Trina Robbins. Those are huge names. You don't need to care about any of that. If you like Frank Miller, and who doesn't, come and see Frank Miller talk about stuff, right? So
I'm looking forward to that myself, so I can't wait.
me too, me too.
uh, you know, Roy, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me. Now the actual exhibit is going on until I believe the end of December, if I'm not
The
mistaken.
exhibit is open daily and it's free. The exhibit's a
Right.
public museum. The Center for Jewish History is a Smithsonian affiliate museum, and it's running through the end of the year. We may extend it a bit, but through the end of the year. The event day, which you do need to buy tickets for, and they're not particularly expensive. The event day is preview night, Saturday night, November 11th, and Sunday, November 12th. You can
All
find
right.
all the information on Juice, spelled JEWCE, for Jewish Comics Experience, juice.org, or just Google Jewish Comics Experience.
And I'll have a link down in the comments that you can also click on if you're watching this at home.
Even better.
Again, Roy, thank you so much for speaking to me. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
My pleasure. See you
Bye.
there.